Good evening, dear friends. And today we are going to discuss about another part of the encephalon that is called as hypothalamus. So far, we have discussed about epithalamus and thalamus also we have seen. Now, what is hypothalamus? What is the location of hypothalamus? And what are the different nuclei which are present in the hypothalamus that we are going to discuss now? So, hypothalamus, under these following headings, we are to discuss introduction, extension of hypothalamus, structures included, subdivisions, connections that is afferent and efferents, that is inputs and outputs, functions, and lesions. Now, coming to the diencephalon, so it is having dorsal part and the ventral part. Let me show you about it. In the dorsal part, we have seen the thalamus, metathalamus. Then in the metathalamus, we have seen the medial and lateral geniculate bodies. In the epithalamus, we have seen the pineal gland, habenular nuclei, and habenular commissure, and the posterior commissure. And coming to the ventral part of our diencephalon, we are going to see the hypothalamus and the subthalamus. Now coming to this particular area, what is the location of hypothalamus? Let us see that. Most ventral part of the diencephalon concerned with visceral, autonomic and endocrine functions. So this is the ventral part and here you can see the dorsal part. So how these two parts have been divided is by the hypothalamic sulcus. So just below the thalamus you can identify the sulcus that is called as hypothalamic sulcus. That sulcus is dividing the diencephalon into anterior part and the posterior part. So the weight of this hypothalamus is about the 4 grams. It forms the floor and lower part of lateral walls of the third ventricle. Now let us see that. So here you can see the third ventricle, and this is the lower part of lateral part of the third ventricle, which is consisting of the hypothalamus. Now coming to the boundaries, what about the boundaries? So the boundaries are anteriorly we can identify lamina terminalis and posteriorly we can identify subthalamus. Posteriorly we can identify the subthalamus, then superiorly we can identify the thalamus, and medially we can identify the cavity of third ventricle. So in this particular area we can identify the third ventricle. So medially we can identify the cavity of third ventricle. So that is about the boundaries of the hypothalamus. Now here you can see approximately this is the subthalamus which is forming the posterior boundary of the hypothalamus, anterior boundary the lamina terminalis, superior boundary you can see the thalamus, superior boundary you can see the thalamus, and the sulcus, hypothalamic sulcus. Here you can see that clearly there is nothing but the hypothalamic sulcus. Yes, now coming to the floor. What about the floor or inferior boundary? So here approximately inferior boundary is present. So inferiorly what we can identify is structures which are present in the floor of the third ventricle. From anterior to posterior we can identify the tuber cinerum and the infundibulum, that is a stalk of pituitary gland. And these two structures, oval structures, circular structures, those are nothing but the mammillary bodies. These structures are forming the inferior boundary of the hypothalamus. And here also you can identify the structures. Yes, moving to the subdivisions of hypothalamus. So we have seen the location of hypothalamus, and now how does it is subdivided? So the subdivisions of hypothalamus is, so here you can identify the two areas. This yellow color one is nothing but the hypothalamus. This is the medial area and this is the lateral area. Now how these two areas have been separated? Now try to see these green color lines. So it is representing the fornix. Now you may get it out. Again, what is fornix? So fornix, it is nothing but the efferent connections, means output fibers which are coming from the hippocampus, they are forming the fornix. Okay, so that fornix, regarding that you can just go through my YouTube channel, you can find out what is fornix and all, so you can get a clear idea about it. Now these columns of the fornix are separating the hypothalamus into two different areas. One is lateral area and the one is medial area. So and then we are going to see the other structures which are separating these two areas are nothing but the mammillothalamic tract. Here you can identify the mammillothalamic tract. So from the thalamus and to the mammillary bodies, the fibers which are coming outside and they are joining with that fornix, and it is also involving in the subdivision of the hypothalamus. Okay, and then fasciculus retroflexus, fasciculus retroflexus, that is also involving in the subdivisions of hypothalamus into two different areas. Now, most medial part of medial zone is this area. This part is called as periventricular zone. Now, try to see here. This is your hippocampus, and this is the fornix. These are the two columns of the fornix. So, from the hippocampus, the output fibers are efferent fibers from the hippocampus extending anteriorly, and these columns of the fornix, right and left side, those are going to connect with each other. So this the fibers which are connecting, that is called as commissure, fornix commissures, and these are the columns, and these columns are which are going extending anteriorly, and then they are going to join with the mammillary bodies. Okay, this is a hippocampus, and this is your mammillary bodies. Okay, that is about the subdivisions of the hypothalamus. Now this is the separate, and we have, when you separate the columns of the fornix hippocampus, it appears like that. And here in this transverse section view, we can identify these are the hippocampus which are present at the inferior horn of lateral ventricle, and these are the columns of the fornix. And here you can see how it is extending from posterior to anterior. Now moving to the fibers of the columns of the fornix and also the mammillothalamic tract and the fasciculus retroflexus, these are separating the hypothalamus into two different areas. So the medial zone, it is called as periventricular zone, and the another part of the medial zone, it's called as intermediate zone. So it is also a part of medial zone. Now let us see the nuclei. Let us see the nuclei which are present in this hypothalamus. Let us see that one by one. So coming to the hypothalamus, anterior-posteriorly, it is separating into four regions from anterior to posterior. First one is preoptic region, next one is supraoptic region, then tuberal region, and then we can identify the mammillary region. How these names have been come now. Preoptic region. So remember, optic means optic chiasma. In front of optic chiasma, that is called as preoptic region. That is adjoining the lamina terminalis. So remember, lamina terminalis is forming the anterior boundary of hypothalamus. Very good. Now supraoptic region, which is present above the optic chiasma. Then tuberal region, which is present at the tuber cinerum. So above the tuber cinerum, infundibulum, and the area around it, that area is called as tuberal region. Then mammillary region, just above the mammillary body. So can you just try to see here? So this lamina terminalis is forming the anterior boundary of hypothalamus. Then optic chiasma, it is also almost anterior, it is present. Then tuber cinerum, infundibulum, and the mammillary bodies, these structures are present inferior boundary of hypothalamus. So that is about the four regions which we can identify. Now try to see here. So this is your preoptic region. Let me show you here one by one. This is the preoptic. Then after that, supraoptic region. We are going from anterior to posterior. Then after that, tuberal region above the tuber cinerum. Then most posteriorly, you can identify the mammillary region. Okay, so the nuclei which are present in this preoptic region, that is preoptic nuclei, supraoptic nuclei, tuberal region nuclei, mammillary nuclei. Now, coming to this preoptic region nuclei, that is preoptic nuclei which are present in the preoptic region. Then the supraoptic region, this is the supraoptic region. What are the nuclei we can identify is, first one is suprachiasmatic nuclei. Can you see here? This is suprachiasmatic, just above the optic chiasma. We can identify suprachiasmatic. Then above it, you can identify supraoptic nuclei. Then after that, you can identify the anterior nuclei, and then we can identify the paraventricular nuclei. So this region, this region is called as supraoptic region. Means above the optic chiasma, this region of hypothalamus is present, and it is consisting of the nuclei suprachiasmatic, supraoptic, this blue color one, then brown color one, this is anterior, and this is the paraventricular nuclei. Now let us move posteriorly. What is present here? Now coming to the posteriorly, that region is called as tuberal region. That tuberal region which is consisting of, first one is infundibular nuclei. Then after that, we can identify dorsomedial nuclei. Then you can identify the ventromedial. This is the ventromedial nuclei. And after that, you can identify posterior hypothalamic nucleus. So this light green color one, it is representing the tuberal region nuclei, infundibular, then dorsomedial, ventromedial, then posterior hypothalamic nucleus. And most posteriorly, you can identify the mammillary region. So let me show you, this is the mammillary bodies. Here you can identify. Above the mammillary bodies, we can identify this mammillary bodies. It is going to, if you take one mammillary body, it is going to subdivide it into two different areas. One is medial nuclei and lateral nuclei. Okay, so this is lateral nuclei, medial nuclei, so intercalated nuclei. So this mammillary body is separated into large medial area, small lateral area, and these two areas are subdivided by intercalated nuclei. Then coming to the region and the nuclei: preoptic region, preoptic nucleus; supraoptic region, supraoptic nucleus; anterior nucleus, paraventricular nucleus; tuberal region, arcuate nucleus; ventromedial, dorsomedial nucleus; and the mammillary region, posterior nucleus and mammillary nucleus. So this is about the nuclei which are present in the hypothalamus. Now moving to the functions of preoptic nuclei. Let us see the preoptic nuclei function is it is regulating the releasing of gonadotropic hormone. Then arcuate nuclei, which is responsible for production of hypothalamic releasing factors. Then the supraoptic and the paraventricular nuclei, these are responsible, are stimulating the is initiating the pituitary gland to release the antidiuretic hormone and the oxytocin hormone. That is the reason the pituitary gland is not considered as the master of endocrine glands. So somehow the hypothalamus is influencing the pituitary gland in order to release the antidiuretic hormone and the oxytocin hormone. Now anterior nuclei, which are responsible for temperature, the dissipation of the heat, and it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. Then the posterior nuclei is responsible for the temperature conservation of the heat, and it stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. Remember, anterior is stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system. Posterior nuclei is stimulating the sympathetic nervous system. Then mammillary nuclei, most posterior nuclei, which is regulating the limbic system. And the dorsomedial nuclei, it is responsible for the hunger center. Stimulation causes obesity. Stimulation of this dorsomedial nuclei causes the obesity. And the ventromedial nuclei, which is causing the stimulation of this area, it is causing the urge to eat. That is satiety center. Okay, then the lateral nuclei, which is responsible for the stimulation, induces eating. It is inducing the eating. Then afferent connections means receiving connections. So the input are afferent connections. One is from the fornix, this connects to the hippocampus to the mammillary bodies. Then we can identify stria terminalis connects the amygdaloid body to the preoptic, anterior, ventromedial and arcuate hypothalamic nucleus. So another input is coming from the amygdaloid body. This is the amygdaloid body, and this is your hippocampus, and this is your mammillary body. Then mammillary peduncle conveys sensory impulses from the spinal cord and brainstem to the lateral hypothalamic nuclei. Then other connections: medial forebrain bundle connects the autonomic and the limbic structures of forebrain to the hypothalamus. Next output is the thalamo-hypothalamic, palido-hypothalamic, subthalamo-hypothalamic pathways connects the thalamus, corpus striatum and subthalamus to the hypothalamus respectively. So thalamo-hypothalamus is coming from the thalamus. Palido-hypothalamus, it is coming from the pallidus. Then subthalamo-hypothalamic, it is coming from the subthalamus. Okay, so that is about the inputs. And last input is direct physical and chemical receptors. Circulating blood is constantly monitored by hypothalamic cells, which function as thermoreceptors osmoreceptors and the chemoreceptors. Now, what about the output from the hypothalamus? So, first one is mammillothalamic tract connects the mammillary body to the anterior nucleus of thalamus, which in turn projects into cingulate gyrus, which is exactly present above the corpus callosum. Then mammillotegmental tract connects the mammillary bodies to the reticular formation of brainstem. Then other output is coming from the hypothalamus. It is descending fibers to brainstem and spinal cord, influences the peripheral neurons of autonomic nervous system. So here you can identify the efferent connections. So let me show you that. So hypothalamus is connected to the neurohypophysis, that is posterior pituitary, and adenohypophysis, that is anterior pituitary, through supraoptic nucleus, supraoptico hypophyseal and tubero-infundibular tracts respectively. That is about another output connections. Now try to see the hypothalamic nucleus, how the hypothalamic nucleus are connected to the pituitary gland. Let me show you that. This is your supraoptic nucleus, which is exactly present above the optic chiasma, and it is connecting to the posterior lobe of hypophysis cerebri, that is nothing but the neurohypophysis. Supraoptic nucleus is connected to the neurohypophysis, and also the paraventricular nuclei, it is also connected to the posterior pituitary or neurohypophysis. Okay, this is the two nuclei which are connected to the neurohypophysis. And next one is superior hypophyseal artery branch of internal carotid artery, which is supplying to the pituitary gland, and also it is supplying to the pituitary gland. Then hypothalamic pathways. So from the hippocampus to the mammillary bodies, the pathway is nothing but the fornix. Then from the mammillary bodies to the anterior thalamic nucleus, that is mammillothalamic tract. Next one, lateral preoptic area, and it is connected to the habenular complex through stria medullaris thalami, SMT. Then amygdala, from amygdala or amygdaloid body to the medial nucleus of hypothalamus through stria terminalis, and from the hypothalamus to the periaqueductal gray matter, that is medulla, then the pons, and through its pathway is dorsal longitudinal fasciculus. Then from the hypothalamus to the preganglionic sympathetic and parasympathetic nuclei through medial forebrain bundle, and from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, that is hypothalamo-hypophyseal pathways. And from lateral edge zone of hypothalamus to the cerebral cortex, it is passing through the histamine and the orexin. So these are the two pathways. Through that, it is reaching to the cerebral cortex. So these are the things you can easily understand, as I have shown the connections of the hypothalamus. So I have shown the fornix, how it is present, where it is present. I have shown a stria medullaris thalamus also I have shown. So when you just read it, you can understand easily. These are the connections and the functions and the releasing of which hormones the hypothalamus is working, that you can easily study and understand. Then hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. So here you can identify the supraoptic nucleus and the paraventricular nucleus, and how these are connected to the posterior pituitary and neurohypophysis. Okay, so and this is the hypothalamic neurons in the supraoptic nuclei, and the hypothalamic neurons which are present in the paraventricular nuclei, and the neurons which are present in the ventral hypothalamus nucleus. Okay, this is about the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Then vital regulatory functions. What about the functions of this hypothalamus? So it is responsible for the temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, blood osmolality, goal seeking and emotional behavior, visceral nervous system and sexual activity, food and water intake. For all these purposes, the hypothalamus is very, very, very important. And also for the releasing of melanin, the skin. So skin color, the melanin pigment, it has been released by the influence of this hypothalamus only. So hypothalamic tumors, what about the clinical aspects? Under or overproduction of circulating hormones produce disorders of growth hormone, that is causing dwarfism. If it is producing more, that is gigantism. Then acromegaly. Sexual function, it is precoccous puberty. Then hypogonadism. If it is less, then body water control, diabetes insipidus by lesion of supraoptic nucleus, and eating disorder, obesity or bulimia, that is caused by the hypothalamus. If the nucleus which are present in that gas already have shown which nucleus stimulation causes overeating, obesity. Okay, and then adrenocortical control, that is causing the Cushing's disease or adrenal insufficiency. Then craniopharyngioma, it can cause the bitemporal hemianopia and hypothalamic syndromes. This is a craniopharyngioma. The diabetes insipidus develops due to impaired secretion of antidiuretic hormone ADH following the lesions of supraoptic nuclei and the paraventricular nuclei or supraoptico-hypophyseal tract. The characteristic features is polyuria, urine volume is very large and low specific gravity. Polydipsia, increased water intake, and it is best known as hypothalamic syndrome. The absence of glycosuria differentiated from the diabetes mellitus. Then metathalamus, it is consisting of the medial and lateral geniculate bodies. Here you can identify the medial and lateral geniculate bodies. These are the small round oval elevations on the inferior aspect of posterior part of the thalamus. Here you can identify the lateral and the medial geniculate bodies. The medial and lateral geniculate bodies are relay stations for the auditory and the visual pathways respectively. The medial geniculate body, which is present here, it is an oval elevation on the inferior aspect of the pulvinar end of thalamus, that is posterior end of thalamus, lateral to the superior colliculus. It is more prominent than the lateral geniculate body. The inferior brachium runs upwards. This is the brachium. Inferior brachium runs upwards, laterally and forwards from the inferior colliculus. This is a brachium to the medial geniculate body. That is nothing but the medial geniculate body. And here you can see the brachium, and this is the medial geniculate body. The connections are the afferent connections, the input fibers. So the input fibers from auditory pathways through lateral lemniscus, either directly or after relay in the inferior colliculus. These fibers pass through the brachium of inferior colliculus. Then efferent fibers. So the output geniculocortical fibers project as auditory radiation through sublendiform part of internal capsule to primary auditory area in the temporal lobe, that is area number 41 and 42. So now coming to the lateral geniculate body, it is a small ovoid prominence visible at the terminal end of optic tract. It is situated on the inferior surface of pulmonary end of thalamus, anterolateral to the medial geniculate body. It is smaller than the medial geniculate body and connected to the superior colliculus by the superior brachium. Okay, so lateral geniculate body is connected to the superior colliculus. Medial geniculate body is connected to the inferior colliculus. Connections, afferent connections. The input lateral root of optic tract consisting of most of the retinal fibers of both eyes, the temporal fibers of both sides, same side, and the nasal fibers of opposite side. Then efferent fibers, the output fibers, geniculocalcarine fibers project as optic radiation through retrolentiform part of internal capsule to the visual cortex of occipital lobe, that is area number 17, 18 and 19. So this is the clear description about the medial geniculate body and lateral geniculate body. This is a lateral geniculate body. Then these are the links I have gone through, and these are the references I can quote. So this structure of hypothalamus, you are clear about it: nuclei, connections of hypothalamus, functions of hypothalamus, and also you can mention the 2 or 3 clinical aspects of hypothalamus. Thank you, dear friends. See you soon with a new class.